You already know how to use the import and export keywords to break up your application into multiple files, but what about including code you didn't write? In this video, we're going to learn how we can import NPM modules. So we'll be able to run a yarn add command to install something into our project, and we'll be able to access it from our client-side JavaScript code. We're going to be using import, much like we've already used import. We're just going to be tweaking it slightly in order to account for the fact that we're loading in a library we did not write, as opposed to a file that we did write. We're going to kick things off by installing and using a library called Validator. Then we're going to install and use React and React DOM. Now there are 3 steps to this: install, import, and use. So before we can even install, we have to figure out what the module is called. Now I already picked one out, and we can find it by Googling npm validator. This should bring us over to the NPM page for that package. And the URL structure is pretty uniform. So here we can see we are looking at the validator NPM package. I'm going to head over to that page, and this is where we have some documentation related to how to use it. And we also have some statistics about the module itself. Things like download counts, recent versions, all sorts of good information. Now, step 1 is to install the module. We're using yarn as opposed to npm. So what we're going to do is run yarn add with this name over inside of the terminal. Right here. I'm going to shut down my Webpack build. I'm going to use yarn add. The module is validator. And we are going to install the most recent version, that is at 8.0.0. Perfect. Now we can go ahead, run this command. This is going to install Validator locally in our project, which means it was saved as a dependency in package.json. It's sitting right here, and its code now also lives in the node modules folder. So we've completed step 1. We've installed it. Now we need to import it. This step can be a little bit tricky because you have to figure out exactly what exports are made available to you by the module. So you usually have to dig around the documentation to figure out how to get what you want. So if I want to use one of the validator functions to validate an email, for example, how do I get access to that? Is it a default export? Is it a named export? What exactly is going on? So the documentation is going to reveal that to us, and the docs for every module are different. You might not always get the most clear-cut documentation. Here, though, we do have 2 examples. We have one that uses require, which is made popular by Node.js. And then down here, we have the ES6 example, which is exactly what we're going to be doing. So we can see that we are loading in the validator library, and we are grabbing the default export validator. Now you'll notice that we're not starting with a ./. That is for relative files inside of our application. When we provide just the name, Webpack is actually going to look for a module with the same name in the node modules folder. It's then going to import that, giving us access to whatever we specified. So we can set up that exact same line over here. I'm going to import the default export validator, and I'm going to grab that from inside of quotes, the module name exactly, validator. Awesome. Now we have access to all the stuff Validator gives us, but once again, we're going to refer to the documentation because we don't really know what's on there. So if we do check out the docs, we can see all of the cool stuff we have access to down here. There are a bunch of methods. One of them is isEmail, and that's the one that we're going to be using. So isEmail takes a string, it returns true if it is an email, and false otherwise. So we can mess around with that and see how that allows us to use the code over here. Let's go ahead and mess around with that method over inside of app.js. We've already loaded in validator. Now we can use validator.isEmail. We're going to pass in a string, something we want to verify. I'm just going to start off with test. Then I'm going to go ahead and log the return value of isEmail to the screen. So console.log. I'll open the parentheses here and I'll close them back at the end. Now if I save app.js, let's see what happens. The Webpack build does need to get restarted. I'm going to rerun that. Yarn run build. Over inside of the browser, we should now have a new build, and right here we're getting false, which is correct. But if I were to add test@gmail.com, for example, and save the file again, this time around we are getting true. This is a valid email. So there we have it. We've just installed, imported, and used our very first npm module. And you can see the format is exactly the same as what we already learned. The only difference is that instead of specifying the path to the file we want to load in, we just provide the module name. Now, if we head over to the terminal for a moment, we can also look at the Webpack output. Right here, we have the two builds. These builds did include Validator, and we notice that the file size got a little bit bigger. For example, it is 78 kilobytes here. If I scroll up to where it was before I installed that tool, it was 3.71 kilobytes. You'll also notice that it says there are 65 plus hidden modules. These are all of the various files that make up the tool, and Webpack is just hiding all of the individual files, since that information isn't particularly useful, and it would create a terminal screen that was basically completely useless. It would be bogged down with a bunch of verbose output. Now, just because we've installed the module doesn't mean it's going to take up space inside of our bundle. If I were to remove the usage, Webpack is going to notice that, and it's going to not include unnecessary code. You can see that if I comment out those lines and I save the build, we are now back down to a much smaller size. It is only when I actually import something does the code get included. So that's a great feature. It means that we can keep a nice trim bundle file, allowing our application to be as fast as possible. Now that we've installed, imported, and used Validator, let's do the exact same thing for React and React DOM. That means we're going to remove this code, and we're going to go ahead and include the React and React DOM libraries. We need to install them, import them, and use them. Step one is to find out their names. We can find that by just Googling npm react. And for React, the package name is just called React, and it's in lowercase. So right here, lowercase React. This is the first library we're going to be using, and the other one we can Google in a separate tab, npm react DOM. This library is what's going to allow us to actually render our components to the browser. We need both of these, just like we had both of those script tags when we had set them up previously. So step one is to install. We're going to do that via the terminal. I'm going to shut down the build, and I'll use clear to clear the terminal output. And we're going to be using yarn add. We want to add both of those. We'll be adding React at 15.6.1, the most recent version, and React DOM at 15.6.1. Andrew from the future, once again, remember we want to use React 16 and React DOM 16, so go ahead and run this command instead. I've only swapped out the version numbers. Everything else is exactly the same. So once we run this, we will have completed the first step, which is to install. The next step is to actually import it. I'm going to clear the output and rerun the build. Yarn run build. Perfect. So right away, the file size hasn't changed dramatically. It is not including React or React DOM in that bundle because we have not imported them. Now to import them, we have to figure out exactly what format those libraries support. And this is a great example of things getting a little trickier than they need to. So if I go over to React DOM and scroll down, you can see the usage is the require function, which we know was popularized by Node. This is the ES5 module syntax. We're using ES6. And when you explore documentation, you might not get both examples, which can be a little frustrating. So sometimes you guessing that maybe we get React back as the default, but if you're not sure, you can usually dig into the docs, and the same thing is true for this tool. So I'm going to close down React DOM, and I'm going to head over to the React website. Here, if we go to the docs, we can indeed get the right information, although I usually just recommend Googling an example, and then you can find the import at the top of one of those examples. Down below, though, we do have the reference for React and React DOM. If I click the React one, it does indeed show how we can grab it. It is a default export, and the same thing is true with React DOM. Right here, they have an import statement at the top, importing React DOM from React-DOM. So we're going to go ahead and do the exact same thing in our code. Right here, importing, first up, the default export React from React, and the same thing is true for React DOM. Import React DOM from React DOM. Excellent. Now that we have both of those imports in place, we can actually go ahead and use them to get something rendered to the screen. I can make a const template, setting it equal to a paragraph tag with the text of testing 1, 2, 3. Then down below, I can use React DOM.render to actually render it. So I'm going to render the template into document.getElementById. And we're going to go ahead and we are going to grab the div with the ID of app, exactly as we've done every single time we've rendered anything in this course. Now, if we save the file as it currently stands, we're actually going to run into an error. Yes, we have React and React DOM installed. Yes, we have Webpack installed, but we no longer are using Babel to transform our JSX. So if I save the application, we're going to get an error in the console as we saw earlier in the course. JavaScript has no idea what to do with this, so the program crashes. Now, to get this actually working, we can take a quick moment to switch this over to a react.createElement call. And in the next video, we're going to look at how we can actually process our JSX with Webpack. So we provide the arguments we know we need. The tag name, I'm going to create a p tag, the empty attributes object, then after that, the text right here, testing 1, 2, 3. This is going to work. Now, obviously, we're not going to be using react.createElement calls throughout the course, but we are going to use just one right now to actually get something rendered to the screen with our 2 imports. Right here, the application reloaded and testing 1, 2, 3 prints. So we have React and React DOM installed, imported, and used. What we don't have is support for JSX. That's exactly what we're going to focus on in the next video, so stay tuned. I'll see you then.